At 22 and 23, we have Shai Hulud and The Voice. Which one should we start with?
I think probably. I think Shai probably. I think Shai we have rated all over the joint, or
Yes.
maybe it's more I've just rated it all over the joint. I think this is a fantastic card, but that's just because I'm terrible at trashing, so it probably gets a bit of a high point here for me. That I'm not the best trasher, and I like fighting a lot, so this is just like this card's almost like made for me.
It's pretty high for you at 6, which is great. I mean, I think it is very powerful. I recently had a game where someone bought this round 1 or 2 and ended up winning the game on the back of this card. So we're off the bat
Yeah,
here. So
you can. Yeah, 7 cost. You can get it turn one potentially. I did have a pool game not that long ago where I got this turn one. At one point, I had a 7 card deck, which was kind of like ridiculous. I didn't win it, like because I'm just in a complete rut at the moment, and that's another point. But yeah, like it's a fun card. Obviously, like it's definitely one that players will try to target to get hold of. Its value definitely does obviously go down the longer into the game you're at here, but the fact that you get the trash on buy, which is a nice bonus. It's mainly the fact that it's a fantastic card for just going to war with. You can muster troops out of nowhere, and the fact that you get a reward for doing something you should be doing anyways. In trashing, you get the bonus 2 troops, which is just like fantastic. It's like a win-win. You should be trashing cards. And the fact you're getting troops as a bonus as well on top of that, I think is like enormous. The Throw Bond for the 5 swords is a nice backup if you're gonna kind of draw it late.
yeah,
Like if you've got combat in and you're gonna go like research station, for example, or maybe a late selective breeding, and you think you could pick this up. But if you've got like liaisons, that's a nice thing. Obviously, its access is a little dicey. In that it's only mining and like the shipping spaces is a little bit of a problem. Makes this quite a very nice candidate for pairing up with dispatching an envoy.
hmm
But even just without that, like this card is very very good and a very nice way to kind of encourage you to get rid of some of your weaker cards. Just feed them to Shy, get the troops out of it, and just kind of like run over some of those mid game combats.
yeah. I agree with both the positives and negatives you said about this card, and for that reason, I rated it 32. Like
Yeah.
I think it's just it's really cool to get it going. I think that it's when you reveal it, it's on average better than than the Worm Riders. I think I kind of rate this the agent ability. Like I rate this one lower than I think you do, mainly because like getting the 2 troops is great. I think that's awesome and powerful, and trashing a card is great. Um, but it's limited, and you can get starved on water, and that could be a big problem. And those spaces are usually kind of hotly contested anyway. But I mean, you can get it to work. There's no problem with that. The
Yeah, this is a good point. Like, it can basically turn, like, you end up, like, if you're not having a great run or you don't have a lot of water, obviously, you end up, like, sending this to, like, Imperial Basin once or twice, which is not a particularly great space. This is
hmm
true.
hmm
But the fact that you can go to Imperial Basin and still potentially send 4 troops into a combat, like, that's pretty good. That's basically a Hardy Warriors, more effectively. Not a million miles away from it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you there. I think the high roll for this would be probably like a shipping turn where you also have that tech that lets you send more guys into troops into the combat. Then that's pretty insane. Although you can't send Shai Hulud's in, can you? You can only send one
No,
person.
well, no, there's no way to do it because you go shipping. Like you
Right,
can't
right,
do
right.
it.
You can't
You
do
can't do
that.
it via troop transports because it's still not a combat
Troops,
space. But
yeah.
to be fair, even so, like you can still do that and have like 3 troops in the combat and then garrison 2 troops afterwards. That's threatening, and that
Yeah.
makes me very difficult to play against because like you can just visit a city and put in 3 more troops if you need to, and that can be very off-putting for a lot of players.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like that's still pretty dangerous.
So I have Shiloh the lowest tier of us, 33. I think, I don't think I have a lot to add to this conversation except to say that for me, there's just this fundamental contradiction or tension with Shiloh. Like any trash card, the earlier you get it, the better. The more often you're going to trash cards and thin your deck. It's got the great bonus that when you buy it, you also get a trash card, right? In addition to whenever you use it for its agent.
Mhm.
The challenge with me is I want trash cards as early as I can get them in the game to have them be, impactful in terms of slimming my deck. So turn one, turn two. And I can never afford Shai Hulud on turn one or turn two. And if I have seven persuasion early in the game in the first few turns, there's probably other priorities for me. That's my issue is that the value doesn't match up with the timing.
Mm.
No, it's 7 cost. It's a little pricey. Like maybe it's 6. This might be a bit fairer, perhaps.
Yeah, I could see it being probably just better than Worm Riders at 6. I agree. It's a
Yeah, I mean,
7 is hard to get
and
to.
World Riders gets dropped to 5. Like I'm not totally against that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just, you probably have more experience with it than I do as well. I've only bought this card once, I think. So
Yeah,
I just have it like, I thought it was good. And I have to evaluate it based on my experience. But
yeah, which is understandable. But no, I get a lot of use out this because I don't visit trash spaces enough. I don't. It's a way I play. I'm happy to play with a bigger deck because I will tend to just pick up like card drawing cards and kind of like mitigate it that way. So Shai Hulud's a really good way for me to kind of like get out of that and do a lot of fighting, which I tend to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Makes sense. Yeah. All right. We have the voice as well at 22-23. We're all pretty much close here in our ranking. BlackShadow, you have it at 18. Patience has it at 24, and I have it at 29. I think it's a little low on my end. I think I should have it a little higher, to be fair. But I know you love this card, Patience. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, just love it. I love that when your agent ability is to reserve a space basically, and especially with all these infiltrate cards we've been talking about with Rise of Ix, and with the Helena, the tech that allows infiltration. What's it called again? The tech.
The invasion
Five
ships.
cost.
Invasion chips.
Five cost. Yeah, that's a really powerful tech. But this blocks it. The voice just blocks everything. So it's essentially reserving the next spot you want, and that can just win you games, really. And
Yeah.
and it has two persuasion on reveal. So I like it. It's a real workhorse card, and it does something no other card can do, and it's cheap at too. So I like the
Yeah.
voice.
I
Yeah.
think this is one of maybe the only cards in the game that I think from base game has their value. I think this value has gone up.
Mm.
Yeah.
I can't think of many other candidates from base game that I'd say they're actually a better card than they used to be. Just because being able to block spaces is so much more powerful now. Because obviously certain spaces are incredibly, incredibly strong, and it lets you do a lot of stuff. And the great thing is, something like the voice, for example, is that you can block spaces that you couldn't go to anyway, just as a pure denial. One thing picking up the voice, you can pick this up like the first couple of turns. This is a fantastic way to block people from getting sword masters.
Yeah.
If you're not going shipping, you can just block up Interstellar, and just mess with people. Like I had a game where like first on the game opened and both voices were there, and I basically action and early reveal took them both, and I was just playing havoc with like a 12 card deck and just constantly blocking. And for like the first 4 turns, there was almost no Interstellar shipping because I was just constantly blocking it, and no one could do very much about it. And there's nothing you can do really. And if people
It's
are trying to circumvent by playing like Mentat spaces, then that's drawing away their money, which they don't want to be doing because obviously they want to be paying for Swordmaster themselves. This is an absolute hassle of a card to use. If you use it cleverly, you got to be a little clever with it. Sometimes you shouldn't just block the obvious things. Sometimes it's worth not playing it straight away and kind of like letting them do the first thing and then kind of deceiving a little bit and then blocking what they obviously want to do after that. So you have to be a little cute with it sometimes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just being able to block up spaces is either great as a setup. This card with say Missionaria, incredibly powerful because you're just guaranteeing an influence bump somewhere. This card with Mother Mahayam is absolutely brutal because again, there's nothing anyone can do about it. This is a very, very dangerous card, and one that you should fear if other players get it. You've always got to factor it into your plays because you could just be, you might have you might have like a game-winning plan in like turn 8, for example, but it might be very specific, and if it gets interrupted, then you might be in complete jail.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree with you. I think this card's ceiling is much higher than most other cards. I think it has, and by that I mean that its value can be much higher than most other cards in certain situations. But it also requires of the player that you be paying close attention to what everyone is doing and be able to anticipate what they're going to do next, because that's when it's strongest. Or you can
Yeah.
do something like Patience was saying, is just play it, reserve the space you want to go next. That's it.
Yeah,
That's
nothing wrong with that.
it's
That's
very
totally
very
fine.
flexible. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you might unintentionally be blocking someone from doing the thing they want to do anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's the
I,
safest way
yeah.
to do it.
Yeah, a couple
Um,
times I've dummied that as well. Like I've like say gone to somewhere. Like I've gone to like Interstellar Shipping, for example, to like cash in for some troops, and then I've like blocked out like say Hardy Warriors, for example, and it's just something completely different, you know.
no,
And
sure,
people are committing troops early. They think, oh dear, well, you know, we got to get in the fight early, and you just don't do it.
sure,
You just
yeah,
do something else. You know, you go mining, you go to visit like you know, it's anything, you know, selective reading, anything like that. You can really mess with people with this card, but it does require you've got to be paying attention. You've got to be kind of observant of what other people are trying to do to get the most out of this. So I think like out of all the cards in the game, this one probably has one of the highest skill caps going
yeah,
because its
agreed.
value goes up with paying attention to what's happening in the first place.
Now that I wanted to mention something about the ability of this card. So the wording is that opponents' next agents can't go to that space. So there's some weird things with this card in that if someone's playing Weirding Way, they can go to another space and then take another action and then go to that space.
Mm.
So there's some interesting interactions here with some of the cards that I think is really fascinating. Weirding Way gets around it, which kind of makes some sense thematically, I guess. But then you have, the fact that not even Infiltrate, not even the Kwisatz Haderach can go to the space that had been voiced, which
Yeah.
is fascinating to me. And if you just happen to have both the voice and the Kwisatz Haderach, then you're kind of in control of a lot of board spaces, and you're
Yeah, and
you're free to go anywhere.
you can go almost do anything you want almost whenever you want, assuming you can pay for costs, and it makes you just like incredibly difficult to play against.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, you could go, you know, if you want, you could go voice to like Interstellar Shipping, block up smuggling, take smuggling, and then quiz out Interstellar and take like
yeah,
5 shipping months.
yep.
You know, with 2 agent spaces and guaranteed. That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Patience.
No, I was gonna say next we've got the Reverend Mother who we were talking about comboing with the voice, Reverend
Yeah.
Yes.
Mother Mohaim. Like this, as somebody said earlier, this card is a high threat.
Yes.
Really just warps the game, right? Like people are like, oh, do they have it in their hand? Are they gonna play it? Are they gonna destroy my Spice Must Flow or whatever plan I have this round? Like
Yeah.
this card is just wild. I
This
love it.
this is definitely a card you also have to pay attention to and kind of see what people are doing. The only defense you've got is it requires setup in that you need to have a Bene Gesserit played first. Obviously, if you compare this with Weirding Way, that's pretty disgusting
Mm-hmm.
because you just can't do anything about it. There's basically no way to defend against it. And definitely, if you're going like a spiceless flow strategy, this is a way to really potentially try and destroy that. So you sometimes have to pivot a little bit. If you're going someone again, like kind of like an Ilbarn example, or even like a Paul, and you kind of like you're not entirely sure which way you want to go, and then suddenly this turns up, and someone gets hold of this, and a couple of other like Truth Sayer maybe, or even like if the voice, for example, you're just gonna have to like say, I don't think I can do spice this game. I'm just gonna have to get committed. The thing I find it's interesting with Mahayam is that I am finding people are more and more just picking it up just for the reveal ability, which in
Yeah.
itself is very strong at 2 persuasion and 2 spies. Like that's
Hmm.
pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Agreed. This is one of those cards that I love. Like, I think this card does some really interesting things, and most of these cards do some unique things. But this one, as Patience said, just warps the way people play the game, which is extremely unique in this game. Where you're kind of used to Euro mechanics that they don't change throughout the game, but as soon as you realize that you might lose 2 cards, which could get you a point, which could let you go to places or whatever, then you start to play a little more cagey, like doing things like early reveals. You start doing things like blocking spaces you wouldn't want to, so that they go to a less useful space at the Emperor or something like that.
Try and force them to well for something.
Yeah. So force them to a space that is less beneficial. I've seen situations where, like, I've been in situations where I would have won the game on Spice Must Flow, but then a Mohaim comes down and makes the game go an extra round, and then the game that I lose on that. There's amazing things this card can do. If you're not paying attention, you can get really wrecked. Um, it does require a lot of setup, and so usually what ends up happening, in my experience, is like someone will get this, and then for the rest of the game, all of the Bene Gesserit cards will be picked by everyone else, so you'll never
Yeah.
get a second one. But you
Yeah.
can. I mean, you might get one. That's good enough usually, but then things have to like kind of align. But yeah, this card's reveal is just phenomenal. Like 2 spice for the passive effect. We were talking about
Yeah.
patience, this action compression, and I think this is one of those cards that really, really shows how action compression can be powerful. Not only does it help you buy cards that you're going to need, like Spice Must Flows, but it also gives you 2 spice, which is effectively a trip to the Haga Basin, or not Haga Basin, the Haga Basin, right? Without any water cost, uh, on average. That's so good. It's so good.
Mm. I think the one thing as well that goes to Mahimum compared to say Tessie Humanity, which is like the only card you can kind of compare it to, is at least in Tessie Humanity there will be some times where like they'll make you discard a card, but you've got something like a freighter fleet, for example, a water peddler, where you don't care, and in
Mm-hmm.
some ways it can benefit you forced to discard a card. But the fact you're forced to discard two means it's always going to hurt you in some way. It's always going to be inconvenient. So I think in that respect, it also makes just the fact that it does two instead of one. I think it's more than twice as effective than Testing Humanity because it's so difficult. And there are times where, if you're not prepared for it, and say if you're using cards like Spice Trader or maybe Guild Chief Admin, stuff like that, where you're discarding cards for alternative benefits, you can end up running out of agent turns, and
Yeah.
that is not like completely uncommon. In the Shadows is another good example where you've got rid of cards, and you run out of agent turns. You just have no more cards; they're just gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only things we really haven't mentioned about Reverend Mother Mahim is that first of all, it costs 6, which is again like edging into the territory where this is your one big cost card that you're building your game around in a way. Um, on the other hand, it also gives you access to the Bennies and to Emperor, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's important as well about this card. Similar to our next rank card, Power Play, which obviously has all the access and I guess is super powerful. We're going 2 levels. This card, maybe this is the card for me that's taken the biggest hit from the base game.
Mm-hmm.
This card used to be like one of the most important cards of the game, right?
I agree.
I mean, it still hardly sits on Imperium Row for very long. Like, just getting a double bump is just obviously incredibly good. But yeah, I would say that its value has gone down a bit. But that's again, it's another one of those where it's only really gone down because there's so many other cards and texts that do things now.
Hmm.
That Power Play's uniqueness is just no longer unique. The double bump is like it. It's still really good, and you still have to pay attention to who takes them, and always be prepared for alliance steals and stuff like that. But it doesn't quite have the bite that it used to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and it's exactly what you said. It's just because when you're comparing it with the other 5 or 6 cost cards in your price range, it's like, is that the best one? Whereas it used to almost always be.
Oh
It's
yeah.
more now. It's like it'll still alliances if people aren't defending properly and aren't paying attention. Whereas it used to be, if you pick up power play, it was almost impossible to counter without just like hammering, going to that alliance yourself and going visiting that faction, even when you don't particularly need to, just to kind of ward off the card. But now there's enough ways around, circumventing. Like even if it does get stolen, you can get around it with cards like in the shadows, web of power. There's a lot of ways to get, just going smuggling and just going instead of shipping and just taking influence that way. So, which I think I would argue instead of shipping has probably had the biggest effect on this card than probably any other in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I think it's got to be up there.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have it pretty close together too, which kind of shows that we all rank it about the same. These cards here in the middle, right before the top, like maybe 15, I think, or I feel, are kind of interchangeable in a lot of ways. Maybe at least for me they are. They kind of like fluctuate, and most of these do based on like my recency of playing them and how much I have familiarity with them. So for instance, like Shai Hulud's way down there for me. I've only played a couple times, but Power Play is one of my all-time favorite cards from the base game, and I just always value going up tracks. So that,
I think this is shown by the fact our rankings are like really really tight, and then you hit
yeah,
like card 14, and there's a massive jump between them. It just shows the gulf between like the A cards, and then once you hit that S class tier, and it's just a completely different level.
yeah, agreed. Yeah, Thufir Hawat is our next card. This one's
19.
19.
I think
We all have this pretty close together, so I'm gonna I'm gonna let you guys talk about this. I'm probably not gonna have a lot to add, but
the one thing I will say is that like as a pool player, this card is unbelievably great. If you know what you're gonna draw, this card is amazing because you can do so many things. As I always say with Paul is someone because you know what you're gonna pick up next all the time. It allows you to make plays and sets of moves that you can't justify with other people because you don't know what you're gonna pick up. It's a guess. Having that foreknowledge allows you to set up like these chains of moves that you couldn't do with anyone else. And Fufi is a fantastic facilitator of this because he can go basically anywhere. Obviously, he can't visit the council for reasons, but other than that, like he's a fantastic way to set up doing other stuff, bits and pieces. Maybe go harder to like still suits, maybe because you're going to be able to pick up like the one card that they like leads to a side Dina. Go to like wealth or something, which lets you pay something off with like money to lead to opulence. There's so many things you can do with Fufi. The fact that you have faction access everywhere is just obviously fantastic and is a great way of just pushing alliances, securing points there. But yeah, the card draw like isn't gone as much as well. But yeah, as a pool player, I love this card. At 5 cost, it feels totally fine. And that's his job, really. He's not like a Gurney Halleck who's going to be like, he's like almost like a finisher of a turn. Fufi is someone you want to be using early on to get the information and to kind of set the rest of your turn. I think that's kind of his role, and it's a role he does very, very well.
I agree with that. I don't. I've had Thufir many times. I don't think I've ever revealed Thufir because so much
Couple of
access.
times.
I want to draw the card because he reveals for an intrigue, right? I don't think
Yeah,
I've
he
ever
reveals for
collected.
one persuasion and an intrigue, which is
Yeah.
there are only a couple of cards in the game that reveal for intrigue. We talk about embedded agent. I do think it's underrated, like being
Yeah.
able to reveal for that intrigue. Like I think typically you want to be hitting factions instead, typically speaking.
Well, in the card
But
draw, right?
yeah.
and the card draw, of course, as well, which is never bad. But I think revealing for like the intrigue, like if it's just like it doesn't really make a lot of sense to use him, or you've just got other better cards that you want to use specifically for whatever reason, I don't think should be underrated because of course that can pull you like a plans within plans, which of course is a god card with Fufir. And that's absolutely enormous with him. So like, it shouldn't be forgotten, but it's not really the reason you pick him up.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just seems to me to be so straightforward. There's nothing tricky, and access everywhere. Give you a card. That's great. It's like one of the simplest, powerful cards.
Yeah.
All right, our next card at 18 is Guild Ambassador. And Patience, you and I have this pretty close together at 14 and 13, respectively. And BlackShadow has him at 33. So,
This is another one I admittedly undervalued a little bit. And I rarely accept this, partially because Guild Ambassador has wrecked me in my 2 tourney games I've played. Absolutely wrecked me, so that doesn't help.
Like you've bought him and it hasn't worked out. You haven't been able to get the lions.
It's more that other people have bought them and have just completely annihilated me.
oh, well, that just shows you how powerful he is.
So
Well, it's-
so your retribution was ranking him low. I hate you.
Yeah,
Suck it, Guild
it's
Ambassador.
Recency bias. Yeah, so obviously this card is fantastic because the ability that you can use it. Obviously, it's the same as always been. Not a lot of access. Although I think just having council access, I think it's probably stronger now than it used to be. I think that's probably fair. Just because the way tech negotiation works and it does a lot of different things is pretty cool. The real question that is about the alliance and the bet trading free spice for the victory point. I think that's probably the talking point about this card as to how good that is in a way. Obviously it's pretty cheap for a victory point, but it's the alliance. And obviously this makes sense. You want to like if you can go shipping early, this obviously is a great card to pick up because you can try to just the Spacing Guild typically the alliance is going to be won by whoever ships most in the first like 4 turns, typically speaking, because people don't want to be visiting fold space multiple times because you don't really want to. Because its value obviously goes down dramatically after like the first like 3 turns, basically. But it does mean that like unless you're going to do a ton of shipping, it's not easy for you to get a lot of use out of this alliance. And what you will definitely find is even if you do decide to do so and you take that, if you take this card, someone is going to target you, or at least someone should target you and force you to have to defend this alliance. Because obviously, if you just let someone just run this through their deck like 3 times, and just 3 victory points for 9 spice, like that's typically game over. So someone is going to typically have to put effort into trying to stop you in doing this alliance, which obviously is not great for you. But the problem is, of course, that it's probably worse for them. Unless they can somehow like trying to get in front of you and then do a load of shipping themselves, or maybe they just luck into like shifting allegiances, perhaps. It's obviously a good counter for that. It's agent action, to get the 2 spice or the guild bump. Obviously, is pretty good, but I don't know how much I value the alliance now because of the way that kind of the game works a bit. Like you pretty much almost typically are going to have to get yourself to 5 or 6 persuasion. Typically, if you've got Go Ambassador, just to protect that, which does mean that you're kind of taking attention away from other things you might like to do.
Interesting. Well, I kind of agree with that. So I rank this one different than the Ix Engineer, though I find them to be very similar in how they make you play. Guild Ambassador sits on the row, and the first thing everyone's thinking is who's going to get the alliance.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is like, well, I could just take this card, and then I don't have to worry about them getting extra points. So I'll just take this card. And that's usually what people will do. I will take this card highly if I'm not in getting the alliance.
You have to, as a denial pick, isn't it? Basically.
It's a denial pick.
Someone has to take it, especially like if someone is racing the alliance and they can't get hold of this, someone has to take this and get in the way.
Yes.
And obviously that's going to create further complications if they then can challenge that alliance as well and just take the bumps, go to tech negotiation. Or go tech negotiation and use the 2 spies to get hold of a tech you wouldn't otherwise.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yes, so, I think that's why this card loses some points for me. Over.
So, I mean, I kind of view it as the opposite, though. Like the fact that you can go to tech negotiation and buy a tech that costs 3 for no investment is hugely powerful. And then if you could just, naturally buy a tech like Memo Quarters or I think it's Memo Quarters, the one that gives you the bump on the track. Is that right? Yeah.
Memo Quarters is 2, yeah.
Yeah, and that plus you can just go up on the shipping track. Like I find this card to be very, very strong, and I think that even if you don't buy it and you're winning the Spacing Guild track, if you have the alliance, you're okay with people having this card sometimes because it doesn't reveal for anything. But
they're forced to use it. Yeah, if they don't use it in agent action, it's just a completely dead card.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that it helps them catch up in that faction. So even if they don't like get the faction access immediately, they'll probably catch up or be close to you, or at least force you to defend. And if they do pass you, they are there's a good chance that they could reveal and get an extra point. So I just find this card to be like such an engine in itself, that for me it's in my top 15. So
for everything you've just said, both of you have said I'm torn about this card. I would consider, of all the cards I have in the top 20, this is the one I would consider downgrading to like a 20, 22. I've currently got it 14, just one below you. It's everything you guys have said. Like it's the deniability of it. It's the fact that it's got limited access. So if you're trying to use it to get ahead, then you have to have a green space available that you want to play that round. But it is self-reinforcing. This is a card that when you get it, if you're not getting it just to deny the obvious leader on the Spacing Guild track, if you're not getting it that way, if you're getting it to play yourself, it shapes your game. You kind of locked in. I have to get that alliance, and then this is one of the ways I'm going to generate supplementary points. And the fact that it doesn't reveal for any persuasion, right? It's just the 3 spice for a point.
Yeah.
Yeah, really does limit it as part of like a reveal for a Spice Must Flow deck.
Yeah, and just like
So
the Ixian Engineer, I mean, this is a kind of card of opportunity. Like, if the person who's winning that track gets it, that's bad. you know,
exactly.
but it's the same thing with the Ixian Engineer. If somebody who has 3 techs already just ends up getting gifted that card, that's bad. Like, it feels like that sometimes exacerbates problems with the Imperium Row. Um, but unlike the Ixian Engineer, I feel like this one is more versatile because I can actually send this to Mentat, turn it into a different card. Um, Whereas Ixian Engineer, I'm basically forced to either ship with it, which is fine. I love shipping. Don't bother with ship any day of the week. But if I can't do that, I'm forced to go to maybe spend water. I might not want to do that. So I feel like the reason this one's higher for me, not only does it helps itself get to where it needs to be, helps you get to where you need to be, um, but it's more flexible than those other point cards. I feel it's one of the more flexible ones, even though it only goes to green spaces. Um, I really like this card. I think as soon as it comes up, I will take it highly. It's a way to win the game. It is a game ender if you can pull it off. So
Part of why I would think of ranking it a bit lower is because the next card on our list at number 17, Smuggler's Thopter, I think is a better card. And I've got it at 16 and I've got Guild Ambassador at 14. So
so if,
I would like almost swap those two or whatever, leave Gurney where he is and move those two up. It's being nitpicky here, but we are getting into the nitpicky stage of the best cards. Smuggler's Thopter is just, always a good card to have at 4 cost. You're drawing 2 cards every time you play it. You're trashing your Dune the Desert Planet and replacing it with this, and it's just amazing every time you play it. 2 cards, gimme.
I
I
will
agree.
accept when I said that the voice was the card in the base game that had benefited the most from Rise of Ix expansion. I completely lied. This is actually the card that has increased the most value in the Rise of expansion,
Yeah.
purely because of interstellar shipping.
Yeah.
Like there is nothing else to be said. Whereas in the base game, you wouldn't normally really race to get the 2 influence till maybe later on in the game because there's other stuff to do. Now it's like the first thing everyone does. So obviously a card like this, you're going to get tons of value out of. You go into like interstellar shipping, you're generating cards, you're taking bumps. It's unbelievably powerful for that. It's a great way of like kind of supplementing, finding an extra spice must flow. Picking up other cards you wouldn't normally otherwise, just because the race to 2 influence is obviously like instant. So purely for that state alone, it's incredibly powerful. It's still not exactly a bad card to like decide to go like say Great Flat for example, and do a load of mining, pick up a load of spice, and then use this just to get a couple extra cards back is never bad. But purely because of the way shipping works, this card's value has just like absolutely unbelievably increased because you typically gonna get the 2 influence almost immediately as quickly as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I think Smuggler's Thopters, which is what we're talking about right now, right? 17
Yeah.
is yeah, it definitely went up the most in value. I think if you really never got this to work all that much until late game in the base game because you typically would want to just hit Highliner a couple times to get your point. And the races were on the other tracks, usually on the Fremen track. So um, but now there's so many other ways to get influence. So this card's value has gone really, 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 really high. It's basically a Jessica without the purchase effect. It's and a little bit more limited in where it can go, but you're never sad
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of being limited in where you can go, Kiter at 16 is like that's the only downside to this dude.
Yeah.
If he had
Yeah.
more access, he would be the bomb. I almost always reveal him. That's what I find. I kind of find him to be a one-trick pony for me. I almost never play him for the access and the intrigue draw. Just 3 is great, and many a game he's been the difference between me winning and losing when I have him because I can draw that Spice Must Flow.
I think I agree, but I agree because I don't agree. If that makes any sense.
Sure.
Go on.
Tell
So,
us.
as someone who does do a lot of combat, I think he's really cool because like he can do that. typically, obviously, if you're going to go for like a more fighting heavy deck, you're not typically going to have a huge amount of persuasion kind of swimming about. And so Pyre can be a really cool way to kind of like have a bit of like a hybridy deck of, you know, a couple of high value. Like having Piter and a couple of like Arrakis Liaisons in your hands is really good. It means that typically you're going to have a draw somewhere in your game where you're going to pick up a Spiceless Flow, like almost every time. You're going to get it once, and that extra point is really huge. But I do think that because I play like that sometimes, it means that you're obviously also going to get times where you're not going to have high persuasion cards. You know, you're going to get kind of a lot of sort of fighter cards, that sort of thing. And then Pyro kind of he acts as alternatives. You know, he can be very flexible. He's a great card, I think, to go to Mentap with potentially. To pick up that intrigue, even going to a city and using him early and pick up the intrigue, it just makes you very difficult to play against because, of course, the mystery of the intrigue is that you don't know what they've got, and that just makes you that little bit harder to kind of predict what you're gonna do. You know, I definitely agree. You should be looking to reveal him with that free persuasion. He's one of only 2 cards in the game that has base free persuasion without any conditions, which is just enormous. And obviously, if you get him to a Spiceless Flow deck, that's really strong. But the only thing I will say is I don't think you should only have him Spiceless Flow decks because typically I found with Piter, he doesn't typically get you to 9. You tend to find he get into sort of like 10, 11, 12, and that extra persuasion can be a bit wasted. You can afford to be a little more flexible with your deck with Piter in your hand. It just gives you a little bit of extra variance. And again, as someone who doesn't trash a lot, but relies a bit more on just pure card draw. That kind of gets me over the line there more often than not. But I do think like having the intrigue draw, like to Carthag for example, double intrigue draw, that cannot be bad.
Yeah, I mean I agree. I think he's good. I do think he's kind of like a one trick kind of character though. I tend to reveal with him as well, which is interesting because I have him down pretty close to where Patience has him, but you play with him a little bit more aggressively. Sounds like, though obviously going to Carthag as you mentioned, getting 2 intrigues is pretty massive. I think that's a really good way to use him, like especially early game, just to get some footing with some
Yeah,
intrigue cards. It's
if you
great.
can get him early, and yeah, like turn 3, turn 4, send him to Carthag, cut double intrigue. That gives you a big jump on the opposition because typically those first couple of turns, no one's really, apart from whoever else goes to Carthag, no one's going to secrets. No one's going conspiring. No one's picking up like Sonic Snoopers, that sort of thing. So it's a great way to pick them up early. Like combined, say with the Baron,
Mm-hmm.
is just like you can just be swimming in intrigue cards really early. And some of those are going to be combat cards. You're going to win early game combats you had no right to otherwise. You can commit to multiple turns, and really put a squeeze on people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might just find that you pick up plans within plans early. You pick up control the market early, and then you know what way you can cater your game towards to, and you can kind of direct it with a much more greater focus than you would do otherwise. So I again, his review obviously is incredibly good, but I do think the ability for him just to pick up intrigues on with going to like cities and such is underrated.
Yeah, I think that's all valid. I like that.
All right, Esmar Tuek. What do you want to say about Esmar Tuek, Patience?
I've got him way lower than at least Black Shadow. I'm trying to see where you're at with him.
I'm at 23.
Uh,
You're at 29, and
yeah,
Black
yeah,
Shadow is at 5.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, Esmar is a very dynamic card. Obviously, he's got, he's got okay access with blue and yellow. His one spice becomes a level on the guild and a card, so that's a great
It's
age
great.
in
Yeah.
action. And then you've got your reveal for 2 and 2, 2 spice, 2 Solari, or unload that for 2 spice,
yeah.
2 Solari. So it's a dynamic card, and I'm gathering that Black Shadow is going to tell us all these situations where he's leveraged it.
Yeah. Which again, this comes to the fact that I tend to run through my deck pretty quickly because I do a lot of card draw. So I get through Esmar a lot. Those resources are huge. The fact you can unload it is so great. It means that even in the back end of the game, you can say like use him. You can like use him for an action, and then the next turn like trash him, or even discard him with Truthsayer or Hollow Projectors, and then trash him in the same like action, and you pick
Yeah.
up 4 Spice and 4 Solari. is enormous. Even with say like Yuna, for example, like that's even better because of course of how the way her Solari bonus works. It's a really efficient way of getting a ton of resources in a very short space of time, and it just lets you just get jumps on people. Like it's really hard to do anything about. Um, and for that matter as well, of course, like if you have him using for his Asian actions, he's the fact it's one spice for a spacing bump and the card draw. It's the spacing bump mainly. It's this game at the moment because the way kind of things work is a lot about how do you get access to the spacing guild without actually ever visiting the spacing guild, because fold space is kind of like it's the rush spot because you have no other choices at the beginning of the game. But once you sort of like get past the first couple of turns, especially if you're in the back end of the player order, you kind of got to work out how you're going to get access and get the instead of shipping online. But even though the space is constantly being blocked from you, and Esmar is a fantastic way to circumvent that. One space for that in the card draw is just like that's a really cheap, easy thing to do. And even later game, that means that if someone else has say gone shipping first and they're just going to sit on the 4 influence and kind of just sit there, this could be a nice, great way to passively pressure them. Because they're going to feel committed, especially if, again, so like Guild Rounding, for example. This card's a fantastic counter to it because for a really cheap cost, and you're still doing whatever it is you want to do anyways, probably, you're pressuring them and you're kind of forcing them to have to spend effort to defend it. And odds are that the effort they're spending to defend is probably greater than the one you're spending to attack it in the first place.
Yeah. For me, Esmar is just really solid. I think this card's value goes up for me if I end up getting some enabler for the unload ability, because that's really where I'm thinking this. I mean, the agent ability is fine, but passively cycling a card to get resources is my jam. So I will like pick this card and then try to get like holo projectors or something like the invasion ships, anything that lets me discard a card, because it is extremely unfair when you just passively discard a card and get a ton of like spice or Solari.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's very unfair. And then you can time this right with like an invasion ships into like with 4 spice into 6 to go to Highliner, stuff like that. Even if it's blocked, like this card's play is massive.
Great tech stealer.
It's a great tech stealer. It's just a really solid card. The only knock against it is it doesn't have 2 persuasion, but I think this card's the way you play this card is you try to get a couple of uses out of it, then you try to cycle or your discard and trash it out of your deck before you start going into a Spice Must Flow strategy. You could even like play it and then go to a selective breeding or something, then trash it, get the benefit, and get it out of your deck, draw some more cards. Like it really it does a lot of great things. Replaces itself, gives you bonuses that you need, lets you go up a track. I don't really have anything bad to say about this card. The only thing that is a little bit problematic for me with this card is that it's limited in that you can't go to a lot of spaces. That's fine. It should be. It's very powerful. If it went to Spacing Guild, it would be kind of broken because you'd be able to go 2 up on the Spacing Guild for 1 spice. Like things like there's a lot of things that they've definitely checked with this card to keep it from being a little too OP. But I think this card is like close to borderline broken. I think it's like the fact that you can get 4 spice and 4 Solari with the what do you call them? The guild administrator. Which one is it? The one that discard guild chief administrator.
Yes,
they're all administrating something. It's really hard to keep track of their names.
There's a lot of books to keep.
There's a lot of books to keep, and so for me, this card gets a little bit too out of control in some games and can feel extremely swingy in a way that's not very pleasing. But that said, it's very powerful, and I have it close to Piter and negotiated at 23, which is about where I wouldn't put it much higher. I think it's very good, but I'm not sad that it's at R15.
I'll be honest, I actually low-key do believe that when they first put this card, I think this probably did go to Spacing Guild as well, and then Paul probably took it out. I can't confirm or deny that. Maybe Paul might comment on the video if he's watching and say otherwise, but I have a funny feeling that this did originally go to Spacing Guild at some point, and then they're like, this is a bit too much, we gotta take this out.
On a side, I'd love to hear a discussion about early drafts of these cards and what kinds of iterations they went through as the design was going on and the development. I would love that, but maybe we'll get that.
Our
in the future.
mailboxes are open.
Yes.
I put this card. I put this card like in a pile, like in a group with Satellite Ban and Guild Chief Administrator. Like all those cards for me, they're not ranked as high as this one is here, but for in my rankings, but they all really are dynamic. They involve unload abilities, discard abilities, and they synergize with other cards that do that, and um they really can go either way. They have great action compression either as an agent or as a revealer or an off unload. I just don't think they deserve, to be in a top tier. So I think I want them a little lower, but I do like the card. It's very dynamic.
All right.
Interesting how big a jump we have here between our average ranking,
Yeah.
right?
Welcome to the S Club.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chom Delegate at number 14, average rank of 14.67. Oh man, I love this card so much. This card might be a mistake.
Yeah, I think we need to address the rather obvious elephant in the room here. How much persuasion should this card cost to buy? Because clearly one is
not
is
right.
not right.
It's not right.
Like,
No.
it just can't. I'm sorry, Paul. Like, I don't know. Maybe you were sick and you had the day off and like you delegated it to someone and like, it's only got like mining infiltration. It's like, ugh.
Who's gonna want to do that? Who's gonna want to ship?
Garbage. No, no. Obviously, this card at one persuasion is just absurd. It goes instantly whenever it turns up. I think there's been maybe only a couple of games I've ever seen where this has not gone within the first couple of reveals after it's turned up on the Imperium Row, and for good reason, just because of the way it's as simple as that. So, what would you rate this at? Like a 3, a 4, somewhere around, maybe even a 5? No, I think 5.
I think a 3 is fair, but to be fair, I think that the only reason I'd put it at a 3 is because I'd still want Ikaz to have access to it with his ring. I think if you put it at 4, it starts to get into territory like, there are better 4 costs like negotiate withdrawal and things like that. But I think 3 would have been easily within the realm of I need this card still.
Yeah, I think that's probably
this card is a little bit unfair. The reason this card is unfair is it always gives you access to interstellar shipping as long as you have access to interstellar shipping through the Spacing Guild. So no one can block you. And part of the way that players govern or keep other players from getting out of control with the shipping is by blocking them intentionally. Yeah. And so when you don't do that, when you have unfettered access to the shipping track, you can kind of just start to pull ahead, and you can see it.
Sorry, go on.
No, I'm sorry. It's just you can see it, especially if this card, if for some reason you get this card and you get like Kwisatz, like you could ship for free twice. It's not fair, and I don't think you should be able to buy that for 9 persuasion. You know what I mean? Like that's my argument of why this card should be cost at least 3. But like, it is the second best, in my opinion, second best in intrusion. What is it called? Infiltrate, thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. The second best infiltrate card, just because the first best infiltrate card is so unbelievably good.
That's the only reason.
The only reason, and it costs 4. It makes no sense why that's the case, but whatever. This card should be just a 3 cost or something. It's just too good. And it also unload. It has an unload ability. Okay, I'm sorry.
We'll get to that.
We've got into this debate before, and I don't want to belabor it. I really think that this quest for balance in the cost of the cards is misplaced. I really like the theme, the variability. The theme, obviously, for the designer was all these infiltrate cards are going to cost 1. These new infiltrate cards, obviously, embedded agent was different, but the other ones, the other 2, and I really like that, and I like the I like that there are two powerful cards. This one's obviously the most powerful. I agree with everything you've said. I couldn't place it any higher just because everything I've got above it in my list, it just
You
you
take
build your
over it.
game around.
Sure.
Yeah, you build your game around those other
But
cards.
here's the thing.
Where
If you saw one of those cards and Chome Delegate, there's probably no way in hell you would take, like, not take both of them if you could. Or,
absolutely.
or you'd maybe take Chome Delegate, see what flipped, and then, I mean, you just have so much options.
Or even maybe even consider taking Chome and not taking your other first, but instead of taking like what would be a good example here? For example, like say instead of taking like Chome Delegate and Web of Power, you take Chome Delegate and Power and like the Voice, or something like that. Or it's a card that you're willing to potentially sacrifice what you're only were after because you can get that and another pretty still decent card just because it's only costs one. If it costs 3, you have a serious decision to make. But because it costs 1, a lot of players are happy to like give up on like an Esmar 2-ek even, and just pick up Cham Delegate and something else for 4 because there's so many good 4 cards in the game. Yeah. So that is the only issue that I think. And again, we don't want to harp on too much about the shipping thing because this is something we've talked about a lot in videos and especially on the TTS Discord, bits and pieces like that. But the way shipping kind of balances itself is when everyone goes shipping and kind of like takes their turn. So if anyone finds way to circumvent that, be it like this or invasion ship stuff like, especially invasion ships, that can be pretty busted sometimes.
Yeah, I mean this game. I know I'm not trying to say that the cards all need to be balanced. I appreciate imbalance, natural imbalance in cards is fine. I like that. I think that this one could have been a little bit tweaked just for the sake of not allowing people to like, I'll take this obvious card and let something else flip and go, then I'll take that. That annoys me a little bit, but it's fine. It's
the one cost. It's the fact it costs 1. It just feels like such an obvious. Like if it was like say a 2, when it should probably be a 3. It's fine. You can feel the fact it's just a 1, given that Interstellar is so powerful. It's so blatantly right in front of you that it's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, that's true. Well, anyway, it's good. I like it a lot. I'll take it very highly. I will always take it when I have it in the row. I like its interaction with ECAS. I like its interaction with the shipping, except for when I don't. I like that it discards for 3 Solari. It's just
the
so
unload,
good.
Yeah, we should probably mention the unload for 3 Solari is hardly. It's not why you get this card, but it's not a bad kind of second prize if you kind of like you have a big deck, for example, and you kind of pull on your last turn, you end up picking Cham Delegate. Like, that's pretty annoying, but you're like, you're still picking up 3 Solari, which can be pretty useful. This in the hands of Yuna, that's 4 Solari on reveal. Yeah. That's pretty good.
It's good.
You can do a lot with that 4 Solari. That's half your final delivery right there. That's almost like your high council right there. That's hardly a misstep.
And like most of these unload cards, I think the best way to play them is to get a couple of really good access or good uses out of them with your agent or reveal, and then trash them somehow so that you get that extra bonus. Like I mean, the fact that they have this one just gives you 3 coins in your pocket. Usually at the end of the game, there are some things that require you to have extra Solari, and it can make a difference. Flagships, yeah. I mean, there are victory cards. There are lots of things. So I just, it's very, very
the free Solari is almost always going to be useful, typically speaking. Like it's never bad to have, but obviously, it's not why you get this. And let's just be honest about it, kids. We know why you want this card. We know.
All right. It works really well with our next card, Opulence. At 13.
Yeah, does it ever. Another big jump, 2 spots on our average, number 13.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think you got some explaining to do here, BlackShadow.
Yeah, I agree.
We both have it at 6.
So again, this is a card that I have probably a little bit low. It's kind of funky, this card. So like I look at it obviously, and it's the reveal 6 eye from each one, which is pretty good. I think it's one of those ones where like if you get it, I'll be honest, when I was kind of ranking them, part of me was thinking you gotta have the alliance for it. I don't know why I thought that. I was like, that was completely dumb. Obviously that's pretty good. 6 Solari for victory point is pretty good, especially again with shipping. Like later game you can get a lot of Solari going on. And if you can get it early game, you can definitely rush Swordmaster. Like this is a very, very strong card. It of course only has access to the Emperor, which isn't as bad as it looks. Obviously, you think you take points away from that, but to be honest, like you're only really using this card to print money.
Yeah,
That's the whole point of the card. So using this to go wealth, you're turning wealth into a 5 Solari square. Suddenly, that's not too bad. You know, that's totally fine. And of course, you can kind of look to get hold of other bits and pieces, like Una again and Tex and stuff like that, which use money for various reasons. It's pretty good. It's all about the opulence, really, and the this is typically going to get you a victory point, probably 2, I guess, in the course of the game. So yeah, you completely ignore my rating. This card this should be high. There's no question about that.
Yeah, this is
Even though
probably for
I don't have the best personal experiences with this card for just whatever reason. It's just the way it's gone.
hey, six Solari is not nothing, right? You especially if you're trying to get your
Yeah.
extra meeple and your high council as well.
Yeah.
I I I do think this though is for me where on our average list at least begins the group of cards that I would put in just a higher tier, call it S tier, whatever, maybe call it A plus tier if you want to keep S tier
Yeah.
for the top few. Because this is a point engine and this is ultimately a victory point game, and this one's going to get you as long as you get it relatively early 2, maybe some I've even sometimes you get 3 out of it, but usually 1 or 2 points, and that's huge.
that's all you need, really. Most of the time, it's just finding that extra point. You know.
Yeah, a couple of points for whatever reason. It definitely it's a great enabler for that. There's no question about that. Its use does obviously change. Early game, if you can pick it up early game, which at 6 persuasion is not easy to do.
That's right.
But obviously, this can power you to go Emperor, get the 2 persuasion, get the 2 influence there to get the victory point there, and then obviously use the money for other stuff. You play opulence to reveal it later and kind of get its value back on itself effectively. But outside of that, of course, like if you're not going particular like heavy shipping now, because getting hold of Solari is more difficult if you're not going shipping nowadays. If you're not going that strategy for whatever reason, like you might struggle to make some use out of this card.
100%, and that's something people really need to pay attention to. And I, early on in my playing of the expansion, I made that mistake once where I just like, oh, that's an amazing card, but yeah, but I wasn't the guy. The person in front of me was all over the shipping track, and I wasn't getting to go interstellar shipping, and like so then opulence gets gimped.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you do struggle again. You're like then you feel forced to use it, which if you're using this to go wealth, 5 Solari is still not bad, but it does feel a little cumbersome. Using this to go conspire 8 Solari, you think, well, that's your Swordmaster paid for, which it is.
Yeah.
But again, it's not why you get this card. It's for the reveal effect, and you've got to, you shouldn't be having to use this card to then later on pay for its own reveal. You should already have some other way of generating that cash, and if you don't reliably do that, that is a problem with this card, and it's the one issue I think this kind of recently has. The access I don't think is particularly relevant. The fact it only goes Emperor, I don't think that really matters.
Yeah, I agree. Your whole game plan when you draw this card or when you buy this card should be to, okay, I got to get enough Solari for when I draw it, it's a point. Like that should be your plan. So you conspire ahead of time, right? You don't conspire with this card. You conspire ahead of time. You get the extra. You get the Solari. Whatever. You get some intrigue. You use your intrigue to get Solari. Whatever you're doing. But you make it work based, or you play your whole game around this card.
Yeah.
The fact that it also reveals for 1 persuasion isn't nothing. It's obviously not 2 persuasion, but it's not nothing.
This card is not going to get you Spiceless Flows and Solari victory points. It will not do both of those.
Well,
If you're doing both of those, if you are doing both of those, you've probably already won the game.
Well, that's probably true, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Fair point.
yeah. If it was a 2 persuasion card, it would be bonkers.
This would be if it would be like top 5 without
yeah, easily. All right. Our next card is the Guild Bankers. Ooh, interesting.
So I think this is a card that again I think does vary a bit depending on like personal experience of this and how you. I think it mainly affects how you play this game. I think does play into Guild Bankers a bit. In how you try to use it. Do you use it for like a way to get hold of a occasional Spiceless Flow cheaper? Or do you use it to try and get 2 in a turn? I think that's the real question with this one. And the fact that it does ultimately cater for both is obviously incredibly strong. To be able to buy Spiceless Flow at 6 persuasion is very, very good. However, of course, there comes the caveat. You still got to pay 6 persuasion, and your typical hand that you're gonna get in a round is not gonna give you 6 persuasion. So you're typically gonna have to do something else to kind of fund this. Usually speaking, unless you've got like a very heavy persuasion deck, which or like ECAS, like this in the hands of ECAS is like ridiculous potentially because it's supposed to flow. You basically can't really do anything about. It's just points. They're just going to accumulate. You can't really stop them. It does have some faction access, which is like a good backup in case you draw just like an absolute garbage hand for whatever reason. There's just nothing you can really do. At least you've got some options there. But obviously, this can easily feature in high persuasion decks to try and get double spices, in hybrid decks to try and, you're going for your alliances, try and win a battle somewhere, try and pick up a spices flow somewhere here and there and pick this up and kind of, modify your game around it. But you do need a bit of extra timing when this comes up. And that is its only downside. If it just comes at the wrong time in your hand, there's not a lot potentially you can do, and it just kind of just does nothing, which feels really bad when it does occur. But still very strong.
Yeah. So I think this one and Sayadina are very close. They're close for me. They're my 10 and 9. And I think they're very similar in what they're doing. They cost very similar. They have similar access. I think Guild Bankers has the green symbol, which is nice. But there's a couple things I want to say. First of all, I think it's not that hard to get to 6 persuasion. It's much harder to get to 9, but it's not that hard to get to 6. This thing effectively is a Piter de Vries, but just for Spice Must Flows. It's not that hard to do that, but what it also does is it frees some of your other cards up to take actions that you wanted to do anyway, and so you don't have to hold those. You could get in some weird situations when you're trying to buy Spice Must Flows where you reveal early. That's like obviously not ideal. But in this case, this card kind of helps you do that, helps you take actions. As you said, the high roll is to like buy 2, maybe even 3 spice in one turn, one round. And it's not out of the realm of possibility, but you do have to kind of play around it. You have to trash cards a lot. You have to trash a lot of your daggers out. You got to get rid of those cards that cost or give you 1 persuasion. You've got to kind of commit to it, and you have to put some liaisons in your deck most likely. If you get this and Piter or Jessica,
it's a ridiculous combo potentially, but you do feel when there's turns up in your hand, you feel compelled to try and maximize its cost, which can interfere with, if you had other plans, you might feel compelled to drop them potentially to try to go for this instead, which you got to just be a little bit careful of. You don't trap yourself a little bit there. You might have you say this and sort of 8-9 persuasion and think, oh, I could go and go selective breeding or research station and try and pick up 2 spice, but you might be better off just staying with the 1. And using the fact that you've got some overflow persuasion to use those cards for actions, as I said earlier. It's not always the best to try and double up on something.
Oh, for sure. Definitely.
Sometimes try and make use of the extra actions you couldn't do instead. Especially if there's some cards obviously that have got great reveals, but also have really strong Asian effects. So it's a way of kind of mitigating around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my only addition I think on Guild Bankers is something we haven't really talked about, which is what sort of puts this card into outer space from from time to time in a game, which is when you get to combo it with Leokines.
Yes.
That's when you're one of my earliest games of the expansion was playing against some really skilled Turkish players, really good guys online, and the last reveal of the game, he revealed for 3 Spice Must Flows with the Guild Bankers, Leokines, and Arrakis Liaison combo. Yeah, it was out of this world.
Was that what can you do?
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I think it's a good card anytime. It's a point generator. It's gonna almost, as long as you're focused, it's almost always gonna get you a Spice Must Flow when you reveal it. But it really has that rare potential to synergize for 2 or 3, even 3 points when Leokines is in play in a round, and that's just wild.
Yeah, agreed.